Russia has now suffered more casualties in Ukraine than in any conflict it's been a part of since World War II. And that's just one reason that experts are arguing that Putin, he's just captaining a sinking ship and that his victory, it is far from inevitable. But Ukraine, they're hurting too, right? Talks have yet to yield real results, and the Kremlin, they've got a lot of dirty tricks in their bag. And so there's a lot that we've got to unpack together. Where we're going to start are with the talks that took place over the weekend between Russian, Ukrainian, and American officials. Right? They were the first involving all three countries at once, and initially, they kind of seemed to go weirdly well. You had Zelensky saying on social media that more meetings would be held provided there is a readiness to move forward. You had the Kremlin apparently agreeing, saying that talks would resume next week, and you also had Zelensky saying that a U.S. document on security guarantees for Ukraine was 100% ready, and that it's now just a matter of picking a time and a place for it to be signed, saying the document will then be sent for ratification to the U.S. Congress and the Ukrainian Parliament. But then the cracks started to show. You had the Financial Times reporting that the U.S. told Ukraine that they'd have to sign a peace deal with Russia before getting security guarantees and that any deal would involve giving up land. But then Reuters spoke to a source who claimed that the U.S. wasn't trying to force Ukraine into territorial concessions. So ultimately, it appears that this continues to be the question that could just screw up any chance of an agreement. Right, the Kremlin, they reportedly said on the deal that it said that Trump agreed to in Alaska over the summer, which would involve Ukraine handing over parts of the country that Russia hasn't been able to capture even after 4 years of war. But then you have Zelensky, who has consistently said that Ukraine's territorial integrity must be upheld in any peace deal to end the war. All while you have experts at the Institute for the Study of War arguing that Putin is just using these latest talks to stall for time and stave off additional U.S. sanctions, as he's done many times before. Though, I will say here that the hope is that he may become more willing to compromise as his troops, they just continue to pay a massive, massive toll for shockingly little gain. Well, neither side has publicly disclosed comprehensive casualty figures. According to a new analysis by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the number of Russian troops killed since the beginning of the war is around 415,000. And the number of the overall casualties, including those wounded or missing, that's around 1.2 million people, which, like I said, is more than any conflict Russia's been a part of since World War II. I mean, it's more than 17 times greater than Soviet losses in Afghanistan during the 1980s, 11 times greater than during Russia's first and second Chechen wars, and 5 times greater than all Russian and Soviet wars combined since the Second World War. And with all that, while Russia now occupies around 20% of Ukraine, it's been advancing at a snail's pace for more than a year. I mean, since the start of 2024, they have reportedly only taken another 1.5% of Ukraine's territory, advancing at an average rate of between 15 and 70 meters per day in their most high-profile offenses. That is slower than almost any major offensive campaign in any war in the last century, which is why with that you have one of the authors of the study saying, Russia's poor battlefield performance in Ukraine and declining economic productivity indicates that Russia is in serious decline as a major power. And adding, while Russia still possesses nuclear weapons and a large military, it is no longer a great power in most military, economic, or science and technological categories. But of course, one of the big things here is even if Russia's getting weaker, Ukraine's not doing so hot either. With the center estimating that between 100,000 and 140,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died so far, which puts Ukraine's overall casualty number at around 600,000, and then actually combined, the total is 1.8 million, which apparently means we're on track for more than 2 million by spring. But also, despite Russia bearing the brunt of that, its troops still outnumber Ukrainians and fighting by almost 3 to 1. And that's in addition to Russia, of course, having a bigger population to draw from to replenish their ranks. In fact, Russia has seemingly kept its troop levels pretty much steady throughout the war, though to do so, they've had to kind of pull out all the stops. Russia's had to carry out its first draft since World War II, and it's also offering massive financial incentives to almost anyone who will enlist. So in one region, for example, you can apparently get $50,000 in bonuses, which is more than twice the average annual income in the region. And then in addition to that, we know as many as 15,000 North Korean troops have fought alongside Russian forces. In fact, citizens of Nepal, Kenya, South Africa, and Iraq are among those who have taken part, though some have reported being tricked into coming to Russia by trafficking groups offering jobs. Also, there have been reports that raids have been carried out in areas where migrants typically live or work in order to pressure them into military service. And actually, in November, you had Putin making it so that military service is mandatory for certain foreigners seeking permanent residency, while laws have also been adopted offering fast-track Russian citizenship for enlistees. So with all that, when an independent Russian news site, together with a BBC and some volunteers, collected the names of over 160,000 troops killed, they found that more than 550 were foreigners from over 24 countries. Right, and that is any troop that wants out might face a worse fate. There's a video going around right now that alleges to show 2 men who have been tied to trees and tortured for deserting and failing to follow orders. And while that specific clip hasn't been independently verified, it is consistent with some other reporting that we've seen from independent Russian media. And speaking of alleged Russian crimes, you actually just had a Russian drone hitting a Ukrainian Ukrainian passenger train with more than 200 people on board. You've got the authorities reporting afterward that they found fragments of 5 bodies, and Zelensky has condemned the attack as an act of terrorism. Also, strikes on the southern port city of Odessa reportedly killed 3 people and injured dozens more. And in the Kyiv region, they killed 2 people, a couple, leaving their 4-year-old child injured and orphaned. And all of that, of course, is millions have been left without heating, electricity, and water because of Russian attacks targeting energy infrastructure. And then also, even beyond all that, there are these ways that Russia's trying to wear down Ukraine that we don't see. One of them being how it's recruiting teenagers for acts of sabotage. Ukrainian officials have reportedly identified around 1,400 sabotage operations linked to Russian intelligence services over the past 2 years, including 800 in 2025, and a quarter of those who were arrested, they were below the age of 18. And many of those teens were reportedly recruited by Russian intelligence agencies through messages on Telegram and other social media channels. And so one of these people, for example, they were offered $2,500 just to pick up a package and drop it off at a police station, but inside was an explosive. And that, as it turns out, was actually built by 4 local boys between the ages of 14 and 16. But luckily, the authorities handled the situation before it was detonated. Now, with all that said, the Russian authorities have also alleged that many teens there have been recruited to carry out acts of sabotage as well, but they've rarely offered evidence.